Good morning and welcome to our worship service on this day when we remember the Feast of the Ascension. It's a feast day dating from about the 4th or 5th century and is told just once in the Bible in the Gospel of Luke and also in Luke's second book called Acts. And as Jesus going up in the air, and artists have shown this. The one I like is where two little feet pop out under the cloud. Of course, it's a theological statement about the heart of Jesus being compassion and love, actually being in the heart of God. The way we understand God is through this compassion of Jesus. I'm going to light our candle. Now, if you'd like to pause your video of us and you might like to click on to the recording from the Belfast Cathedral of the opening hymn, Love Divine or Love's Excelling. And the prayers as we gather. A quote from Keith Ward. We now know that if Jesus began ascending 2,000 years ago, he would not yet have left the Milky Way unless he attained warp speed. Ancient metaphors like the Ascension, when freed from literalism, point to the uncontainable nature of the divine. God in Jesus is gone from our sight, gone from our control, gone from the prison of our need. The divine can instead be found in all sorts of places, among all sorts of people, the moral and immoral, the clean and unclean, and even in us. May we have the eyes and wisdom to perceive the love called God in all we are, do, and see. Elizabeth Browning once wrote, "The earth is crammed with heaven, but only those who see take off their shoes." May we take off our shoes to know the need for it, to make the time for it, to find the place for it, and quieten our restless thoughts. And then in our quietness, open our minds and hearts to the wonder of the Aroha called God, that ignores every barrier, every boundary, and every border in order to include and embrace. May we have the eyes and wisdom to perceive the love called God in all we are, do, and see. Elizabeth also wrote, "Whoso loves believes the impossible." Love divine, random kindness is your touch. Caring for others is your smile. Doing the impossible is your language. Compassion is your heart. May we have the eyes and wisdom to perceive the love called God in all we are, do, and see. Amen. I'd like to now invite George to give our first reading from Genesis 32.
The messengers returned to Jacob, saying, "We came to your brother Esau, and he's coming to meet you, and 400 men are with him." Then Jacob was greatly afraid and distressed, and he divided the people that were with him and the flocks and herds and camels into 2 companies, thinking, "If Esau comes to one company and destroys it, then the company that's left will escape." And Jacob said, "O God of my father Abraham and God of my father Isaac, O Lord, who said to me, 'Return to your country and to your kindred, and I will do you good,' I'm not worthy of the least of all the steadfast love and all the faithfulness that you've shown to your servant. For with only my staff, I crossed this Jordan. And now I have become 2 companies. Deliver me, please, from the hand of my brother, from the hand of Esau, for I'm afraid of him. He may come and kill us all, the mothers with the children. Yet you've said, I will surely do you good and make your offspring as the sand of the sea, which can't be counted because of their number. So he spent that night there, and from what he had with him, he took a present for his brother Esau, 200 female goats and 20 male goats, and 200 ewes and 20 rams, 30 milk camels and their colts, 40 cows and 10 bulls, 20 female donkeys and 10 male donkeys. These he delivered into the hand of his servants. Each drove by itself. And he said to his servants, pass on ahead of me and put a space between drove and drove. He instructed the foremost, when my brother Esau meets you and asks you, to whom do you belong? Where are you going? And whose are these ahead of you? Then you shall say, they belong to your servant Jacob. They are a present sent to my lord Esau, and moreover, he is behind us. He likewise instructed the second and the third and all who followed the droves. You shall say the same thing to Esau when you meet him, and you shall say, moreover, your servant Jacob is behind us. For he thought, I may appease him with the present that goes ahead of me, and afterwards I shall see his face. Perhaps he will accept me. So the present passed on ahead of him, and he himself spent the night in the camp. The same night, he got up and took his 2 wives, his 2 maids, and his 11 children, and crossed the ford of the Jabbok. He took them and sent them across the stream, and likewise everything that he had, and Jacob was left alone. A man wrestled with him until daybreak. When the man saw that he didn't prevail against Jacob, he struck him on the hip socket, and Jacob's hip was put out of joint as he wrestled with him. Then he said, let me go, for the day is breaking. But Jacob said, I won't let you go unless you bless me. So he said to him, what's your name? And he said, Jacob. Then the man said, you shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel, for you've striven with God and with humans and have prevailed. Then Jacob asked him, please tell me your name. But he said, why is it that you ask my name? And there he blessed him. So Jacob called the place Peniel, saying, for I have seen God face to face, and yet my life is preserved.
Thank you, George. And now I invite Barbara to read from John's Gospel, chapter 17.
After Jesus had spoken these words, he said, Father, I have made your name known to those whom you gave me from the world. They were yours, and you gave them to me, and they have kept your word. Now they know that everything you have given me is from you. For the words that you gave to me, I have given to them, and they have received them, and know in truth that I came from you. And they have believed that you sent me. And now I am no longer in the world, but they are in the world, and I am coming to you. Holy Father, protect them in your name that you have given me, so that they may be one as we are one.
Thank you, Barbara. The Ascension as an historical event never happened. If a tourist with an iPhone had been there at Bethany, they would have recorded nothing. Jesus' going into God has always been a theological statement. The important question then is not whether it happened, but what it meant. And given what it might have meant, is that the only way of conceiving of God? The Ascension meant, firstly, as I said in the introduction to the service, that the heart of Jesus is for all time in the heart of God. And Luke symbolizes this with this going up into the cloud scenario. The disciples of Jesus, their experience of him was so overwhelming that they saw in him the human face of God. And all Christian understandings of God derive from this initial experience of Jesus' disciples. Secondly, now that Jesus was dead and gone, his presence still seemed to be with them. And the early movement used the Hebrew story of Elijah and Elisha to construct a belief about the Spirit of Jesus continuing to be powerfully among them. So Luke paints a picture of a reformed bodily Jesus going up at ascension, and then a windy, fiery spirit coming back down. The other gospel writers don't have anything like that. John's gospel doesn't have Jesus going up. Rather, Jesus is already one with God, as per our text today. Heaven is now in the fourth gospel. To receive the Spirit, Jesus simply breathes on his disciples and tells them to receive it. And for Matthew and Mark, the bequeathing of the Spirit also doesn't happen. They just expect believers to get on with it. The formulation of the Trinity 3 centuries later would pick up these Ascension and Pentecost themes. However, it would be a very different painting, using Greek colors to radically revise the earlier Jewish canvas. Both the understanding of the biblical authors and the 3rd and 4th century church, though, shared a common belief in a 3-tiered universe. Earth, the middle tier, was flat. God lived on the top floor, and Sheol or hell was in the basement. That's why Jesus went up. Up was where God was said to be. And that's why traditional Christian liturgies still use this flat earth language of God up top, sending Jesus down, then Jesus going back up, sending the Spirit down to be with us, and then we, after death, going back up. I think the notion of God up top speaks to our human longing to be rescued. There are many people who have felt like they're drowning in pain or misery, depression or isolation. They've cried out for help. The life support of family, friends, and caring agencies haven't always met their needs. They don't feel they have the resources within themselves, and they pray to an up-top God, especially a friendly-looking Jesus God, to come and save. And I understand that prayer and empathize deeply with that prayer. But I don't think it's an accurate depiction of the oneness of God known in Jesus. That God, to continue this metaphor, was in the troubled waters with those drowning rather than plucking them out, in the form of you and me and others. That God did not and does not defy the laws of gravity, but rather encourages people to swim and help those who can't. To be a little simplistic for a moment, there are two primary notions of God in Scripture. One is an up-top God who has power, directive power, and like a feudal king determines policy and requires our obedience. The other is a God, and often I write that God with a small g, of energy or spirit, which is known in acts of mercy and justice. This God does not so much require our obedience as our creative participation in doing these acts of mercy and justice. The up-top God is named in categories of power like Father, King, and Lord. And the other God is named in categories of giving, like compassion, love, and loss. The up-top God was developed when the three-tiered universe was understood as a fact. Whereas today we would say there is no top floor and basement. There is just this beautiful, wondrous universe in which the energy of love lives, moves, and has its being. Such earth theology gives rise to an ethic that treats fellow humans, other creatures, and our environment compassionately and respectfully, even if it is to our own personal detriment or loss. On the other hand, theology with God on top, above and over us, gives rise to an ethic of trying to live up to what that God wants, as interpreted by an ecclesiastical elite. The heavenly rescuing God will only save us, they say, if we are good and do and believe what we are told. And those elite often collude with the political and economic elites in the name of stability. And the poor stay poor, albeit with some charity, and the rich stay rich, albeit with some tax breaks. The Ascension story says Jesus is not here. He's gone, gone for good, gone into God, gone from our sight, gone from our control. So don't go looking for him. To change metaphors for a moment, the historical Jesus was a window frame through which we could understand God. Now, with Ascension theology, we view God without the frame. If Jesus showed us the meaning of God as love, and Meister Eckhart said the best name for God is compassion, then this divinity called compassion can be found and experienced in all sorts of wonderful and strange places, among all sorts of wonderful and strange people, among people of faith and no faith, of high morals and no morals. So Ascension theology says there's no limits on divinity. Divinity is beyond our control. Our task is simply to be compassionate, and in this way to be one with the God called compassion. The Hebrew text for today, Genesis 32, is from the legend of Jacob. You may remember he's a trickster. He cheated his twin, but firstborn brother Esau out of his inheritance. And now, many years later, they meet up again. Esau has always been physically stronger than Jacob. And now Esau has 400 armed men, considerably more than Jacob. Jacob is scared. So he calls out to the God up top to save him, reminding God of God's past promises in case God's had a memory lapse. On hearing nothing from the deity, Jacob then sends gifts to Esau to pacify him. Indeed, Jacob sends all his possessions ahead of him, including his most cherished, his wives and children, until he is alone. Then, frightened and alone, Jacob has a dream. Or is it? He wrestles all night with a man, a messenger from God. Or is it God that Jacob wrestles with? The text is ambiguous. Is he wrestling face to face with Yahweh? How can that be? Or is it putting on our best counseling and psychotherapeutic glasses? Himself he is wrestling with. Is he looking into his past, his identity, his need for power and fame, and struggling with it? He asks this man, messenger, God, for a blessing and receives a new name instead, and a limp. Maybe it is actually his now permanent limp that is the blessing. And although that crisis with Esau would pass, thanks mainly to Esau, Jacob didn't from that moment on have a blessed life. He continued to make screw-ups and experience much pain and suffering. Naming something in the theological world is problematic, and that by naming we might assume we have a handle on it. And notice, in that story of Jacob, he asked the angel, this one he's wrestling with, for a name, and refuses. Naming assumes that we know what we are dealing with, or we know the nature of it, and therefore it's predictable. And it's long been acknowledged in theological circles that this is a problem. For how can we talk about something that is beyond language, like God? The story from Genesis 32, I would suggest, shows one understanding of God as the top or powerful one that Jacob cries out to in distress. But the text also shows another understanding of divinity, which wrestles with us as we face ourselves and which wounds us. The blessing is not gain, not more power over a brother, not more wives and children and weaponry, but loss, and maybe peace within himself. Mechthild of Magdeburg lived from about 1210 to 1280, a well-known German mystic. And she talks about sinking into or dissolving into God. So the Feast of Ascension, which traditionally celebrates Jesus going up into God, can be thought of as Jesus dissolving into the God love, who that is all. But Mechthild is not talking about this sinking or dissolving as something that happens just after death, but is using the metaphor to talk about the spiritual life now. And this is the understanding of many of the mystics, that we are in God. That God is not a being, but being itself. So to be in God or be in God, we both open our spiritual eyes to a reality of a different way of conceiving of God. And we also choose to participate in acts of God, in acts of mercy and justice, compassion. To use Paul's language, nothing can separate us from the love of God. So we become one with love by freely choosing to place ourselves on the side of love. Or as Lady Julian of Norwich said, the ground of compassion is love, and the working of compassion keeps us in love. In Acts, the Acts version of the Ascension, there's two little angels, messengers, And they say to the disciples something that goes, this is Glynn's translation. Don't look for Jesus and God up in the clouds, you guys, but follow the Jesus spirit in living out his vision of compassion. Amen. Now I might like to push pause and listen to a reflection by the graduate choir as they sing Te Aroha.
Kia ori.
We come now to the prayers for others, and Neil will lead us. Let us hold in our hearts and minds those for whom we are concerned.
Let us pray. God around us. We pause and remember the people, families, and communities across the world who have lost loved ones, friends, workmates due to COVID-19. We pause and remember the people who face poverty and hardship due to the implosion of the economy and society. This week, we remember the people and churches of Angola and Mozambique, countries who suffered under colonization and destruction, divisions, and destabilization in the civil war that followed. These countries need to balance protecting their natural resources while developing their communities and protecting the poor. Christ with us. We remember those in this country who have lost their jobs and face uncertain weeks and months. Those who find themselves impoverished. Those whose health is fragile. Let us not forget how the natural world has rebounded and flourished in surprising ways in empty streets, along quiet verges. God within us. We pause and remember the people of this community who have supported one another and the communities around them. We pause and remember those known to us who are unwell, those who mourn for family and friends who have died. In silence, we remember those uppermost on our minds. We pray together. God, our Mother and Father, help us to honor you. Come, fill the world with love and kindness. Give us each day water and food and a roof over our heads. Forgive us for the bad things we have done, just as we forgive others. Help us to do good things for other people. Amen.
Thank you, Neil. And the prayers as we go. Do all the good you can, by all the means you can, in all the ways you can, in all the places you can, at all the times you can, to all the people you can, as long as ever you can. May we leave behind the nostalgia of the past and go forward adapting and modifying our traditions to meet the challenges of the future. May we participate in God, listening to the hard stories, speaking up for justice and compassion, being tender, understanding, and resilient. And may we discover ourselves immersed in a communion of love. Amen. The hymn is God is Love, the Heavens Adoring. If you'd like to listen to the Salisbury Cathedral sing that hymn, please click on the YouTube link. And the blessing. Blessed are those for whom faith is a river, winding its way through the gullies and valleys of living, irrigating land and crops, quenching thirst, to play in, to fish in. And the river changes in volume, in mood, in clarity, in purpose. And we change too. Blessed are those for whom God also changes. The God of our past floats away, or just dissolves into irrelevancy. And we discover another, different divinity, where we dissolve into the oneness of all love, compassion. Amen. Have a blessed week.
In the ever-shifting waters of the river of this life, I was swimming, seeking comfort. I was wrestling ways to find a boulder I could cling to, a stone to hold me fast, where I let the fretful waters of this river around me pass. And so I found an anchor, a blessed resting place, a trusty rock I called my Savior. There I would be safe from the river and its dangers, and I proclaimed my rock divine, and I prayed to it protect me, and the rock replied, God is a river God is a wild raging rapids and a slow meandering flow. God is a deep and narrow passage, a peaceful sandy shore. God is a river swimmer, so let go. Still I clung to my rock tightly with conviction in my arms, never looking at the stream to keep my mind from thoughts of harm. But the river kept on coming, kept on tugging at my legs, till at last my fingers faltered and I was swept away. So I'm going with the flow now, these relentless twists and bends, acclimating to the motion and a sense of being led. And this river is like my body now, it carries me along through the ever-changing scenes and by the rocks that sing this song. God is a river, not just a stone. God is a wild raging rapids and slow meandering flow. God is a deep and narrow passage, a peaceful sandy shore. God is a river swimmer, so let go. God is the river swimmer, so let go.